Okay, let's talk about the U.S. Marines during the Second Seminole War and start with the Patriot War. The first conflict of the United States came into conflict with the Seminoles was during the Patriot War. And you might say it started off with the Marines with this battle we're going to talk about here in a minute. The Marines served a significant part in the Second Seminole War, especially. Uh, so we're going to talk about the Patriot War and the Second Seminole War and Marine officers who were killed in both of those. But going to the Second Seminole War in 1836, General Jessup came up with an agreement with the Marine Commandant to take the garrisons of the forts along the Fort King Road and remove the army companies there and send them in the field chasing after the Seminoles. The forts were subsequently garrisoned by the U.S. Marines, and one of them was Fort Foster. And let me bring your attention to Fort Foster. It was near the center of where Hurricane Milton came across the state in Tampa Bay. Actually, the um, hurricane came through quite a bit of area. The fort has actually flooded twice before that I can remember. So it's not unusual for the river to come up and flood the area. It's just that, of course, we can't have any tours or any events until the water's gone. The Hillsborough River is at record stage, and right now the Withlacoochee River is at record stage on higher than it's ever been flooded at before. So, it's became a naval base now. Park ranger and a kayak visited the fort. You can see water on both sides, and going inside the fort, you see water in the fort, and even on the picture on the right, climbing up in the blockhouse, you can see water in the fort with the commissary building in the middle and the water on the side. So. It affects it quite a bit. It really damaged interior of the park, the iconic suspension bridge over Hillsborough River. You can see the river has gone out of its banks and now is in front of where you have the staircase going to the suspension bridge. And let me show you some of the damage that the appeared on the Facebook page for the park volunteers, showing why they can't have people coming in the park right away. You see a tree downed over the cables that the suspension bridge is suspended from, and it's turned the walkway sideways, damaged the uh, bridge over the river. That's probably about 80 or 90 years old. So it's very serious. It's also they can't have people coming in and visiting the parks until the power lines are cleared, until the trees are cleared. They can't let anybody camp in the campground if there's no electricity, there's no lift stations, there's no sewer stations to run the restrooms, and so all the facilities are stopped. So um, just let these parks sometimes they get damaged really bad by the hurricanes and might take weeks or even months. The park I once worked at after Hurricane Wilma, we expected it would take us 2 weeks to open back up. It took us a week until we opened up. So it does affect it. But anyway, let's talk about the Marines. The War of 1812, Lieutenant William Sharp Bush was the first Marine officer killed in action. He was aboard the USS Constitution in battle on August 9th, 1812. And I'm sure know how the Marines are. There's a lot of tradition and ceremony going towards being the first casualty of one of the officers dying in battle. There's about three other Marine officers killed as a result of combat during the War of 1812. The next one was Captain John Williams, uh, which was during the Patriot War about a month later in Florida. And this is where this painting comes from. And let me show you a bit web page if I can find it. Oh, where'd my share screen go? I'm sorry, this is a new computer. Okay, here we are. Okay, this painting, Marines in the Frigate Navy, Ambush, St. Augustine, 11th September 1812 by Charles H. Waterhouse from 1985. This beautiful background showing the Marines that are ambushed and Captain John Williams laying wounded on the ground. He was shot about 7 or 8 times. He went to St. Mary's. He was convalescing there for a couple weeks until he succumbed to his wounds. It's kind of interesting. It was expected for a while that he might recover. And he writes, so, I've been shot 7 times, but, I'll get better in a few months, I imagine. Sadly, he did not survive, but, that's a tough Marine. You get shot so many times and you're still around. He was buried in St. Mary's. A little bit more about that later. The Marines were with the filibusters, I guess, whatever you want to call them, that were trying to set up the Patriot Republic in the East Florida during the War of 1812. President James Madison authorized the expedition, put a Colonel Matthews in charge of it, and they came down and put St. Augustine under siege. Were occupying the abandoned Fort Mose. Things did not go well for them. The Americans did not go well during the beginning of the War of 1812. The United States basically abandoned the Florida campaign. They had other issues on the northern border up by Canada. So they basically had to abandon it. So the Marines were actually bringing supplies up to Davis Blockhouse when they're ambushed in the 12-mile swamp. I'll put this web page in the link in my notes. So Captain John Williams, let's go back to him. So 12-mile swamp, Captain John Williams, he died from wounds he received in action, hung around about 2 weeks afterwards. He was originally the military commander at Fernandina. The United States had occupied Fernandina to prevent the British from occupying and using as a foothold into the invasion in America. That was originally a Spanish settlement. So Captain John Williams, he did actually have a significant role during the Patriot War. Um, he was, of course, wounded en route to supply Camp Davis. Interesting what happened to that is that they were ambushed by the Black Militia in St. Augustine, who had Seminole Indian auxiliaries with them. Afterwards, Colonel Daniel Noonan, who was with the American uh, contingent at the Davis Blockhouse, took 250 Georgia soldiers and went and attacked King Payne towards Paynestown on Alachua Prairie, Payne's Prairie, which resulted in the mortal wounding of King Payne. So that was the first American battle against the Seminole Indians in September 1812, which started over what, 40, 46 years of conflict with the Seminole Indians. So Captain John Williams, he was buried in St. Mary's with this very ornate stone. In 1904, his remains were reinterred in Arlington National Cemetery, and the stone was moved up in there. It's the longest epitaph in Arlington Cemetery, and you can see that pretty scroll work describing everything going around it. It's definitely the 1812 letters or font. Uh, the next Marine killed in combat, or actually uh, died from wounds that he received. He was, you know, reinterned in Arlington. The next Marine officer after the War of 1812 that was killed or died from wounds received in combat was Lieutenant Andrew Ross. Over 20 years later, at the Battle of Wahoo Swamp on November 21st, 1836. Interesting story about him. And this is the Battle of Wahoo Swamp, the roadside park that I've shown many times, about 8 miles from Dade Battlefield. I think it's County Road 48 that goes to Floral City. In Wayside Park, here's some other views of the marker. I've taken photos of this over the last 10 years at least of this interesting monument. Uh, yeah, the Withlacoochee River is now at flood stage due to the hurricane, so I don't know how wet it is around there right now. But let's go back in a minute. The Battle of New Orleans in January 8th, 1815. You can see the American line. This is actually a pretty accurate painting of what happened. You can see the British along the uh, Mississippi River are attacking the American line, this corner here. The Americans had a forward redoubt here, and it was manned by soldiers of the 7th Infantry, and the British at one point breached the redoubt in heavy hand-to-hand combat. They were beaten back, but that's probably the most contested area on the January 8th when the British actually breached that line and they had to fight them back. The American officer who was in command of the 7th Infantry soldiers there, his name was Andrew Ross. Oh, this is a little closer up. You can see the action. The problem with that redoubt is being forward when they fire those cannons. It actually, was hitting the side of the redoubt, so it was not a very safe place to be. So Lieutenant Andrew Ross, not sure if I have his right birth date. Um, so let's say born about 1786, I think, or I might be thinking of Lieutenant Bush. He became an ensign in the 7th U.S. Infantry, U.S. Army in 1809. So I believe he was the first lieutenant by the Battle of New Orleans here in 1815. But there was a problem because the British breached the area. He was looked at with suspicion. Jackson didn't like him very well. So he was going nowhere with his career in the Army at this point. And so he eventually resigned from the Army in 1817 and joined the Marines instead. And he was with the Creek Regiment in 1836. Kind of interesting that the U.S. Marines were escorting the Creek Indians on removal from Alabama out to Indian Territory. One of those Marine officers, young Lieutenant John T. Sprague, he soon resigned from the Marines and joined the U.S. Army. Well, Andrew Ross, he went the other way. He resigned from the Marines or resigned from the Army and joined the Marines. Get it right here. Okay, so he was with the Creek Regiment in 1836 when they were at the Battle of Wahoo Swamp, and he was mortally wounded at the Battle of Wahoo Swamp. So the Battle of Wahoo Swamp, you may know that's where Lieutenant or Major David Moniac, the highest or the first Native American who attended West Point, originally commissioned in the 6th Infantry. He resigned when they organized the Creek Regiment. He was made captain. I think he was given a brevet major promotion. So this at the Battle of Wahoo Swamp, a painting by Jackson Walker that called Tribal Duel, showing when Moniac jumps in the water to cross the river. And he's killed right after this view here, shot by Seminoles on the other side. Lieutenant Andrew Ross, I don't have any image of him. He was also shot, mortally wounded in this battle. He lingered on and eventually died 3 weeks later at Fort Heileman on December 11th. So, two officers killed by Seminoles, Captain John Williams, in the ambush in 12-Mile Swamp in 1812, and Lieutenant Andrew Ross in 1836 from wounds received at the Battle of Wahoo Swamp. Over 20 years apart, Marine officers killed in combat, both due to Seminoles. So I had made reference to this video in my previous one. Then I realized I hadn't done this video yet because I was going through it and had to flee my apartment for the oncoming Hurricane Helene. And now we had Hurricane Milton. I'm done with hurricane season for now. So I want to get back to telling you some Seminole War histories. I put links down below so you can see about the web pages I shared and the images I shared. And that was pretty interesting.